In late August of 1994, in the town of Crockett, California, an environmental disaster would occur that would unexpectedly change the course of modern clinical neuroscience. Just over the hill, a massive oil refinery would begin leaking an invisible chemical that would leave toxic sludge in its wake, damaging property and human lives. That leak would continue unabated for 16 days. One of the victims of the disaster was 44-year-old Jay Gunkelman, a brilliant EEG technician and environmental activist who had been unraveling the secrets of brain activity for years in the lab, but had gained little professional credibility due to his uncredentialed past. The skin injury he incurred during the toxic waste cleanup was minor compared to many, but the consequence of this man's chemical burn would have profound implications for a completely unrelated field. In a strange turn of events, this injury would lead Jay Gunkelman to quietly usher in a revolution in neuroscience, with an explosion of knowledge regarding the ways we use electrical activity of the brain to identify, understand, and develop treatment protocols for neurological and psychiatric symptoms. This is his story.
Hello. Hello, hello.
I basically have considered myself a dead man for 27 years, and it's been very freeing. Without that, I never would have started lecturing. For years, I've done environmental consulting, and as a freebie, it's my avocation, not my vocation. I've never charged any money for it. The town I lived in Crockett, California, is next door to a refinery about a mile away. The refinery had a leak of a catalyst called catacarb, and it's highly alkaline, and they leaked it for 16 days, 250 tons, and didn't tell anybody that they had a leak. Finally, the leak is discovered when it's oozing and dripping off of everything in town. It's like syrupy, sticky, almost like honey, and it eats paint. So people that had fancy cars had to have their cars detailed and some repainted. Houses had to be power washed. There were, in a town of 3,300 people, there were about 1,000 people sick. I mean, sick. And I got it on my forearm, and it's an alkaline burn. You know, if you stick your hands in detergent, that's an alkaline burn. You're red and dry and crackly skin. Yeah, big deal. Wait a few days, it'll go away. You're gonna be fine. So I got this alkaline burn on my arm, and I had set up a clinic, negotiated a settlement with a refinery, set up a clinic in town to deal with the thousands of people that were really ill. And the environmental specialist that we brought in saw this rash, and he said, you know, that should have gone away a long time ago, a month or so ago. You know, this is not right. Let me do a blood test and figure out what's going on. I got a call the next day. He said, you know, there's nothing right in your blood chemistry. I've never seen a blood panel this screwy, and I can't think of anything other than your pituitary that could do all of these things all at once. Go get an MRI of your head. So I called the MRI center. June, this is Jay, you know, do you get an opening real quick? You know, oh yeah, well, what is it? Well, they want you to scan me. And I said, oh, what'd you do this time? Because I've been in the MRI center before. And I said, well, they want you to scan my head. And they said, well, finally they're examining the right spot, you know. And I could tell when I came out and no one would look me in the eye that they had found something. So I get this pack of MRI films, and I could tell there's something this big, dead center in the middle of my head that looked like a yin-yang symbol. I'm a little Taoist by tendency. It was the body of the tumor and the tail wrapped over the optic chiasm. And I was shocked. I mean, you know, this is, it sat me down in my chair because You know, you see a brain tumor the size of a golf ball in the middle of your head, you know it shouldn't be there. It's a shock. And the only thing I could think to do is call a neurologist friend of mine, Mike Bass, who had read in the lab forever and read EEGs with me. And he told me, one more thing wrong with you, you'll be a monster. And so I had this MRI showing this brain tumor. I called him right up and I said, Mike, I'm looking at an MRI of my head. And he gave the same line. Finally, they're examining the right spot. And I said, I'm looking at a tumor about the size of a golf ball, right dead center of the middle of my head. There's a long pause, and he says, geez, Jay, I don't know what to say. I said, yeah, you do. I called you to tell me I'm a monster. And we had a good laugh, because we're both sick as hell, you know, but within 2 weeks, I had the brain tumor removed by Charlie Wilson, who invented the transphenoid. It'll take your face off, take the tumor out through your face, put the face back on. Dr. Julian Isaacs had an EEG spectrum lab in our big suite and invited me to do a talk. And this was after my brain tumor, and my inclination was to say no, because techs don't do talks. But I thought, well, what the hell, I'm dead already. What are they gonna do, shoot me, you know? So sure. So I did my first talk, and after that, they haven't let me stop. Yeah, 27 years ago, toxic waste saved my ass. And my life came along with it, you know? If somebody's perceiving this field as unbelievably complex, it's the right perception. If you come in thinking it's a simple thing, you know, ABC 1, 2, 3, linear logic, kind of an idea of how the brain works, you know, a phrenological understanding of how the brain works, you know, you're in the wrong field. Go into accounting, you know. If you see the complexity, if you see the awesome complexity, then you're seeing it accurately. The thing is, don't give up. You're on the most impossible learning curve in the world, but it's the right one. Look up ahead of you. There's somebody up above you. Grab on and learn from them. But reach behind you, because there's somebody that needs to know what you've learned already. And we have to hang on to this chain of people, top to bottom, on this learning curve. And there's nobody on the top. If there's somebody who says they're on the top, run. They're dangerous. Nobody can master this. It's a field that you can only know a piece of. A human brain can't hold within itself a full understanding of the human brain. But the solution to that puzzle is that a network of brains can hold in the network a solution for that puzzle. So, you know, we really need to know a deep piece of it, but don't expect to know it all, and network with people that have a different piece.
My name is Rusty Turner. I'm a physician and neurologist trained in pediatric neurology and clinical neurophysiology. Been doing this about 35 years. EEG has been what my career has been about for the last 30 to 35 years. It was discovered way back in the 1920s, essentially, by a physician in Germany, how to record brain waves without actually cutting the head open. It has grown since then. It's used all over the world, primarily as a tool to look at the electrical activity of the brain. It's used primarily if somebody has a seizure, maybe a headache, a stroke, petit mal, absence seizures, things like that. For most of my career, I used EEG like we typically do for diagnostic purposes, for risk of seizures, signs of epilepsy, and then we stop there. We get the test, we read all the squiggles, we provide an interpretation and try to guide treatment and management that way. But there's a great part missing from that EEG, is what do those waveforms mean?
So my name is Yuri Kropotov, and I am head of laboratory of the Institute of the Human Brain of Russian Academy of Sciences in St. Petersburg. I am in the field for more than 20 years, and by my first education, I am theoretical physicist, and by the second education, I am a neuroscientist, and I am a professor in neuroscience. And for this work, I was awarded with the USSR State Prize, the highest achievement in the whole Soviet Union. I analyzed this data myself, and I can tell you that QEEG and event-related potentials are largely underestimated.
My name is Ali Hashemian. I'm the director of Brain Wellness Center. We are a psychiatric group that specializes in neuromodulation and brain stimulation in addition to the traditional medication management for patients. In addition to this, I'm also the CEO and president of Brain Science International, where we process thousands of QEEGs every year for various facilities, and I'm partnered with Jay Gunkelman in that business. Sadly, EEG, which is produced by the brain, is the most underutilized product of our medical community. Unfortunately, the only value to a lot of doctors has been if the patient is having a seizure or epileptic discharges or not, and that is where it has ended. And primarily, everybody's got more fascinated and interested by different and perhaps more sexy, if I could say that word, in brain imaging, which produces nothing more useful or significant than EEG has, but is more is newer, and so is therefore more exciting and gives you prettier pictures.
So EEG is a very accurate, time-sensitive test that looks at the actual functioning, electromagnetic functioning of the brain. CT scan, computer tomography, brain MRIs look at the brain structurally. Functional MRI is a little bit different, but that measures, in a sense, blood supply as sort of a serendipitous measure of brain function. So if you're looking for something structurally like a stroke, brain tumor, developmental problem in the brain, MRI is still the diagnostic test of choice, but it doesn't tell you anything about function.
Actually, we are looking at the brain through different windows. So MRI, functional MRI, PET give us one window, and EEG and event-related potential give you another window. And this window is characterized by millisecond time scale. The other technologies, they have second or even minutes time scale. The EEG provide in window that reflects processes of cortical regulation and information flow at the millisecond time scale. And this is a big difference. And it looked like that this is only technology that gives you this advantage.
So let's say that I did an MRI of this wall, for example. It shows me if there's electrical wires, and if they're spliced somewhere together, it would show that. X-ray would show me if there's actually wires in the wall or not. MRI would show me if the wire is perhaps broken or they're spliced somewhere together, but none of them will show me what the current is that is running through these wires. And is that current sufficient for the workload? Is it not enough, or is it too much? And if you're looking to how the function of someone's brain and behavior is, isn't that what you should be looking at? If you were obtaining imaging, you could get the raw tracing from an EEG, which shows you 19 different regions of the brain if you're using the standard 1020 system, and how the electrical activity of the brain is being measured in those areas. And you can produce pictures from it. A SPECT scan, on the other hand, uses radioactive isotopes that you either have to inhale, or you inject it, or you swallow. The area of the brain that is using the most sugar lights up. In a SPECT scan, I get the images that shows me this area of the patient's brain is overactive. But it doesn't tell me how overactive it is compared to what the norm is. So it gives you this similar data, but is missing the very important component of how hot that fire is. So imagine you're a firefighter. You don't need to know whether there's a fire, but you need to know what kind of fire it is. Because in firefighting, you would use different tools based on the fire you're trying to extinguish. Information has to be actionable. Just having pretty picture is not enough. You need to know what can you do with that and somehow be able to take the data from the picture and apply it to either the brain or the medication management.
Typically EEG, when we read it on a screen or a computer or like paper in the old days, it's a qualitative EEG. We're just looking at the squiggles. but those squiggles mean something. And to transform that data to get the EEG quantitatively gives us what are called functional maps. That gives me information about the patient's functioning of their brain, the child or the adult. And then you use that information to correlate with their history. Amazingly useful. It transformed my practice. You can really show brain function and then sit down with them and show them the pictures. And this is what it's telling me about your brain.
The brain has been a fascinating organ. Knowing it structurally, neurochemically, the electrical activity of the brain's response to patterns of stimuli, all of that are things that I've plumbed as deep as I can, and I have no idea how deep it goes. It's a learning curve with no top, but it's the right one to be on. I've been a weird kid my whole life. My pediatrician called me professor, and when I lock onto something, I lock onto it. It wasn't just about EEG. Brain science in general got my attention, and then EEG as a specialty after that. I had a really fabulous instructor at the second university I went to. The first one I did pre-med for 3 years, and although I was accepted in medical school, that was my dad's desire, not mine. And so I took philosophy and psychology courses, and given the strong medical background, physiological psych appealed to me. And I had a really fabulous instructor, Bill Beatty. What really hooked me was a course that I took from him. We walked into a little tiny lab room, with 4 lab desks in it, and there were 40 people in the room. And this was elbow to elbow. And the instructor, Bill, walked in and he said, tomorrow, look to your right, look to your left, they won't be here. In the first 2 weeks, we're gonna dissect the brain, and you're gonna have to make from 2 spots on the surface an imaginary line and tell me the structure and functions of everything that line passes through. And sure enough, the next day, there were only 4 of us there. From that point on, physiological psych and neuroanatomy just had me. If it has anything to do with the brain, it sticks in mind. If you hook onto the world's most difficult puzzle and you're a bit of a perseverative person, you're hooked. I mean, I can't put the damn thing down. This is an image from the North Dakota State Hospital, which we started the lab in 1972. It was the first state hospital, the first hospital to have a applied psychophysiology lab in the world. And we wrote a grant as kids, and they funded us, But it's because they knew my father, I mean, we were connected. And we got funded because they knew the family, and they cut us loose for 6 months, and we actually provided them enough patient benefit that they gave us unlimited funding at that point, whatever we needed. This is the rooms that we put our lab in were outfitted with a cell, like a lockup cell, and a bed. In case you were misbehaving or something, it would lock you up in your room in your cell. This is me at that era, the hair down my back, obviously, like usual, smiling like a goofy, but facial hair thing again, mutton chops and a mustache. Somebody should have told me, This is the North Dakota State Hospital, an aerial, and they had a farm that raised wheat. They had cattle for meat. The medical center, it was a community unto itself. When I started working there, before they had the lab built, I was running a night shift on the lock ward, and up to we have a Dutch door and the upper part's open, and 2 guys with their coats on. Well, this is a locked ward. You're not going anywhere with your coat on, and so I thought it was pretty funny right off the bat, and I looked up at who it was, and one guy had a homicidal warning and the other guy had a suicidal warning on him. So I thought, well, these guys are kind of dangerous, and they said, we want you to let us out or we're gonna beat the hell out of you. And sitting in front of me is an iron bar. I got a choice. I can beat the shit out of them with an iron bar, and I'm not there to beat people up with an iron bar, or I can let them go. And I said, well, I'm gonna let you out, but let me tell you what's gonna happen. You're gonna get out through the door here, go down, you're gonna have to jimmy open the door at the bottom to get out, and then you're gonna be free, you think. But you're free to go nowhere, really. You're gonna escape, you're gonna be out in the middle of some snow-covered field, and the sheriff will see you with a spotlight. They're gonna run you over with their car. They're gonna drive across the field, they will run you over with their car. They won't get out, they'll run you over with the car. And sure enough, about 3 hours later, they were in the medical ward, having been run over by the sheriff's department in the field, running away. So, you know, there's nothing around it. So you're a sitting duck if you escape and they know it. On the left, the curly-haired guy is Larry Woodard. He was the engineer who built all the equipment for us, and obviously that's me on the right, with our grand opening of the lab cake that the food service gave us. And that's Larry in the equipment room. Patient room off to either side. That's an Audigen 120 in front of you there, which is a terrible little machine. And there's me in my office with my first wife sitting on the desk. We were married at 21 years old. We made it a year and a half. Hippies, you know, she went off with somebody else, and that was the end of that. This is a picture of me in the air, diving off of a 75-foot cliff into a glacial lake, Montana, Glacier Park, Montana. This is diving off of the rock formation above Cracker Lake next to the Saya Glacier, which might not be there anymore for all I know, you know. 1976, I moved to California, and after moved here in 75, but by 1976, I was going to have to get a job. Originally, I started manufacturing equipment out in California, spectral data systems, Jim Hart, Larry Woodard, myself, and we were bringing what we were doing from the North Dakota State Hospital to a microcomputer from a mainframe. And we showed our equipment in 1976 at the California Society meeting, and we had a pocket-sized brainwave analyzer, just the boards, and I had to get a case made for this thing, and it was $175,000 to make the mold for the injection molded case for it. And that was $1976. And we didn't sell any of them, not one. The whole industry of neurofeedback quit getting government funding in early 70s. And you know, I thought these were going to sell like hotcakes. You know, they'd be usually flying off the shelf, you know, if we had them on a shelf. And I realized, what the fuck? These aren't going to, nobody's buying not a one. And I thought, how do you make a small fortune in neurofeedback? Well, you start with a big one. And I dropped a big chunk of change on that mold, and there was no way to recoup it. And I thought, well, I got to get a job. And I looked in the newspaper for want ads, and I saw the weirdest freaking little tiny ad you've ever seen. SM, small, MED, medical, CO, company, NDS, needs, FLD, field, REP, rep, and a phone number. I mean, just not even a complete word in the entire ad. I thought, well, medical, you know, if I got to get a job, at least it'll be in the medical field. And I called, and it was an EEG company. And I thought, well, geez, that's great. I'm into EEG. And so I went in for an interview. And the guys, you know, looked over what I had in the state hospital and the lab and my background. And he said, you're perfect for the job. But the next level up interview with a vice president of the company, he won't even talk to you. You've got long hair. You're going to be meeting with hospital administrators. You're meeting with doctors, chiefs of staff, you know, they won't even meet with you. This is mid-70s, hippie days, you know, and I had beard and long hair. And So I said, okay, schedule the meeting for tomorrow. I'll get my haircut. So I went into Berkeley, and the Raven was the haircut place on Shattuck Avenue, and I went in and told them I were going to cut off my hair, and they said, oh, you can't. You know, I had blonde hair to my butt, and I said, no, they're going to donate it. You know, I want to send it home to my mother. So they washed my hair, braided it, but nice silver clasp at the top and the bottom of it, and then snipped it off and then styled the hair. I sent this foot-long braid home to my mother, who called me right away and said, did you cut your beard too? I said, no. But I did it for a job interview, and the next day I meet with the guy, and he says, you know, you're perfect for the job, except you're going to be meeting with hospital administrators and doctors, and you're going to have to cut your hair. And I said, yesterday I could sit on my ponytail. I'll shave it off, I don't care. What kind of style do you want, you know? I had a kind of a blocked off at the back, and you thought it was a little too long or something. Anyway, I cut it off for a job. But it was the EEG lab, and I traveled throughout the entire Midwest, Montana to Ohio, down to Nebraska. The entire upper Midwest was my territory. They had hospitals all over the place, and they had been trained how to hook up EEGs with the 3-finger method. 3 fingers up from the eyebrow, put an electrode, 3 fingers, an electrode, 3 fingers. And for a small head, you got an electrode on the back of the neck, you know. So this is, you know, it was, you know, whoever went through and trained him didn't really train him. It was just kind of a slap dab, quick way to, and the people didn't know any better. And they could see in the lab that the quality of the recordings was terrible. And so they had to have somebody go around and retrain all these people. So I spent 8 months going the entire upper Midwest, training little tiny podunk hospitals how to hook up and transmit EEGs off satellite into San Francisco. And at the end of the 8 months, I said, I'm done traveling. Just, you know, 6 to 8 weeks on the road at a shot, and you know, I'm done. And so they put me into the lab there in San Francisco, receiving EEGs over 100 a day for, well, until the 90s when I quit. I cut my hair for a job, an EEG job.
I think his wealth of experience, having seen probably millions of EEGs and being able to tell things apart, that's of course something that's almost impossible to teach to someone else. You cannot request other people to really have looked at millions of data.
It's that just seeing the thousands and thousands and thousands of EEGs that he has seen, recorded, had sent to him, that his knowledge of what is there, what to look for, that just like Anton Ramon told me, that the EEG will pop out to you. And so yes, Jay is an EEG tech, and I trained as an EEG tech, but I can say for absolute sure that Jay is not just an EEG tech.
That he said, look, when you look at an EEG, it's like looking at your grandmother. You have to recognize the pattern. Even if you see only part of your grandmother, you will recognize her. If you look at an EEG, you'll recognize the patterns. You don't need sophisticated software. You don't need sophisticated analysis methods. Just look at tons of EEGs and you will start recognizing the patterns. And this is...
I was interviewed by a group, and their whole thing was that, talking to the man who'd seen 500,000 brains. Well, I didn't see the brains, I saw their EEG. How do you get a number like that? The lab I worked in San Francisco, an average day was over 100. We very seldom were under 100. On occasion, we topped 200. But use 100 EEGs a day because it's easy calculating. And, you know, normal number of work days in a year. I was on call, but the on-call was never as busy as the day. So just use the work days. Figure normal, couple weeks off a year, because my doc was never any more generous than that. So 50 weeks out of the year, you know, do the math. 100 a day, and it mounts up really fast. The actual numbers are much higher, but nobody believes the 500,000, so why do an accurate calculation? You know, 500,000, 750,000, somewhere in between there, maybe probably up closer to the 750, again in the early 90s. Anyway, there I am in the pit. You can see EEG rider units. They started over here, wrapped all the way around the room. We had 14 rider units in the room with a big kind of island of desks in the middle of it. And these are the more modern receiver units. Grass model 810s and grass model 6s. At any given time, you may have all of them going at the peak of the day, but then it would dribble down to one or two of them at a time during the quieter early morning and end of day. But it was a survival skill to read EEGs. I mean, if you didn't read them fast, the pile would fall over on you. And you don't want to refold, fan-fold paper. We had 400 hospitals. That's how you get 100 a day. And I always had the nightmare that one day, every one of our hospitals was going to need service. And over 200 becomes a real heavy work day. You go home feeling beat up at the end of the day. You put your feet up and you look up at the sky and go, you know, you're just brain dead after a day like that. But you know, you can do it. But 400 was the nightmare, you know, and all of us in the lab had that same nightmare, you know. The stacks. We had row after row after row of EEGs stacked to the ceiling. And it was a fire hazard, you know. If there was a spark, the whole thing would have gone up in a flash. This is actually on a neon Coden, one of the first neon Coden machines into the US. They came to and we gave them advice on what their machine should do better than the one that they brought to show us. And they went back and redesigned the damn thing, came in and just cleaned up the US market. This was the Spectrum 32, the first quantitative EEG machine. $165,000 a piece. We had to have 4 of them for the lab. It was a step up from the old technology. These were the receiving units in the background there, that built into Samsonite suitcases. When they finally got upgraded to new stuff, we had hundreds and hundreds of transmitters in suitcases. And they were going to just throw them all in the trash in San Francisco into a big dumpster. And I thought, no. There's gold switches in there. You know, let me take these to Berkeley, to the recycling center, and you know, they'll take these. And so I take them all there, and I knew the guy who ran the Urban Ore, and so I pull in with a truck full of suitcases. This is pretty much the end of the Cold War era, and as I pull in, he sends somebody out to assist unloading it, and he says, "Oh, that's Jay. He's with the CIA, Crockett Improvement Association." He knew me from the town I lived in. And this guy heard CIA and thought like CIA. And he comes out and we've got all these suitcases that look like spy gear. And believe me, I used to have trouble getting these through the airport even. But he thought these were all, you know, sure, these are all EEG transmitters. He was sure that these were all spy devices, so. You know, if you've seen enough bad EEGs, you know a lot about artifacts. So I wrote a book about artifacting, and luckily I kind of got into the field of neurofeedback again, having started there, and gotten into clinical, and then got popped back into the neurofeedback world. Dr. Shear, who owned the lab, entrepreneurial neurologist, a strong influence. Here's Harley reading EEGs at the reader's desk. Here he is giving a lecture. This is Charlie Yeager, who started the Mayo Clinic's lab in 1930. Translated Berger from the German, built their own amplifiers, started Langley Porter when he moved to California. He was an MD, PhD back before it was more common. I was exposed to a tremendous amount from him. He taught the neurology residents that came through UC San Francisco Langley Porter for decades and decades. There's Charlie Yeager and Dr. Shear, Harley Shear. Harley paid for the development of the telephonic transmission of EEG. 8 channels of EEG off a telephone line. We had 400 hospitals that send data to us. They shaped my view of EEG. And in addition to all of that, back to school with the depth of understanding of neuroscience, of the functional meaning of different areas in the brain. So you can overlay the EEG feature with an understanding of what's happening in the turf that it sits on. So if you see hyperexcitability in a cortex area, you know what that function is. So you kind of get a read of what's going on for the person, not just the EEG, but an interaction with a person. So hanging out in a laboratory that does 100 a day and it's all clinical work, you end up picking up bits and pieces. You kind of bootstrap your way up into an understanding of the clinical neuroscience of neurology. If you have this kind of a discharge, you get this kind of medication. If you got that kind of a discharge, you get a different class. The understanding of the medication effects on the brain. This is Fred and Erna Gibbs. Gibbs and Gibbs. They discovered that you could see epilepsy in the EEG in the early 1930s. They met in Lennox's lab and got married. And I learned a deep appreciation of the brain's out-of-control discharges from them. And this is me taking a picture while they were, I was in their office in Chicago for this, and they were signing a couple of their books for me. What wonderful folks they were. They were very, very gracious teaching about epilepsy for me. That's Henri Gastaud, the French electroencephalographer, and he's signing a book for Harley. And this is in our lab. And if you look in the background here, that's a Grass Model 3 that we still were using.
Yeah, takes up half the room.
You'd have to turn it on in the morning, first thing, and you had to have it on for about an hour before you could put the pens on it. And then you had to align the pens and everything. It took you about an hour and a half to get that thing set up ready to run. John Hughes, MD, PhD out of Northwestern, he would stop into the lab when he was teaching at Letterman in San Francisco, and all the cases that I disagreed with the doctor about, I would set aside. And when John came, I would bring out a case full of paper of EEGs for him to look at, and from my perspective, decide whether the doctor goofed up or not. And I learned a lot about weird transients and discharges and stuff from John Hughes. He was a real gentleman, and was there at a meeting one year. We had, at meetings, they used to give the same EEG data to a bunch of different people and have them all analyze it independently. And side by side, you don't end up having to stand up and show what you found and what you think is needed to fix it. And I presented and other people presented, and the last person up is Bill Hudspeth, who's passed many years ago now. And Bill said, "Oh, you're all wrong. This is an epileptic." And he showed an EEG waveform that had a spike and wave in it. And I said, "Well, it's a convincing spike and wave, but there's no field and there's no phase, so it's an artifact." And Bill turned to me and he said, "Well, I had a neurologist read it, and you're just a tech." And I said, "Well, that's true, but to err is human. And we have a tiebreaker here on row number 3 on the aisle is John Hughes. John, what do we have?" And he said, "It's an artifact for the reasons you gave, no field, no phase." And John's an epileptologist, not just a neurologist, so his credentials, MD, PhD, he trumps your doctor. And it caused a little bit of a ruckus that year. But John was there to save pull my fat out of the fire when somebody challenged the fact that I was just a tech. And I'm a tech. I'm happy to be a tech. Carl was doing a presentation at Key West EEG, QEEG, and it was the first time his lab had come up with a new display, a quantitative EEG mapping. And, that's an interesting new display. We just came up with it. Anybody have an idea what it might show? People would raise their hand and he'd call on them and they'd come up with an idea of what it might be, but they were all really, really not even rational answers. So I'm laying in the sun warming up after being in this ice cold water, and I said, Dr. Prebram, I think I might know what your display is. And he didn't even look up. He was toweling off his back, and he says, "Oh yeah, what do you think it might be?" Kind of like, "Oh, here's another stupid idea," And I said, "I think it's traveling waves, John Hughes's work." And he stops kind of midway through drying his back, and he says, "Oh, Johnny's work." He says, "I think you might have something." He turned and looked at me and says, "Who the hell are you?" And we, chatted quite a bit after that, and we've been good friends ever since. And but those were the people that really shaped my early days in the EEG world and formed my opinion of what the brain could actually be used to see.
I think Jay has had one of the greatest influences on educating people, really getting people to care. I think at some point, Jay will be known as the Einstein of the brain. In my 21 years in the business, I haven't met anyone more knowledgeable. I've seen him blow away neurologists. I've seen him blow away neurosurgeons. I've seen him completely amaze epileptologists. And Jay will always, of course, say, "Oh, well, there's Dirk de Ridder, or there's Yuri Krupatov, or there's Martijn Arns," but these are the guys that look to Jay as their mentor. These are the guys that look to Jay as the knowledgeable one. Dirk has said to me personally, he won't do brain surgery, do neurosurgery without talking to Jay first.
So I'm Dirk de Ridder. I'm a neurosurgeon working in New Zealand and in Belgium. Being a neurosurgeon, of course, I don't need Jay to help me in my neurosurgical practice, but if ever I have a question about EEG or even how neurophysiologically a brain works, Jay will be my first point of contact. So if I have an EEG that I say, well, I have no clue what this actually means, I will contact Jay.
At the beginning, before I met Jay, I was not optimistic. My view to the field was not optimistic. And for example, I was very skeptical regarding neurofeedback. And now I became a believer. And I think that Jay played a critical role in this changing of my attitude. Actually, he enjoys what he is doing. And he loves this field. And he is trying to understand the truth, the ultimate truth. And he is driving in this understanding the truth, not by commercial interest, but just curiosity. And I think that Jay is the last romantic in this field. And I think that this is supposed to be Jay's legacy.
So what I like about Jay's characters, I mean, I've often referred to him as a walking library. He always can dig up small facts, features that you thought like, well, where did you get it from? I mean, he somehow has the capability to read things and it sticks in his mind and he'll never forget it. So,
neurofeedback continues to grow worldwide. The evidence base that exists with it is vast over decades, with more than 20,000 peer-reviewed literature publications. And that's something you don't hear from many physicians unless they've taken the time to research it. Typically what I hear, if it's brought up from a colleague or something, it's like, oh yeah, neurofeedback, yeah, it doesn't work, or it's done by psychologists or something. And respectfully, sometimes I call that contempt prior to investigation. And that's just not a good place for us to be. It's not a way of working in integrity. If I don't know about something, I'll learn about it, or I'll keep my opinions to myself. Jay's impact in this field of neurofeedback, neuroregulation, our ability to help the nervous system, has been extraordinary and vast. I wish he'd been able to have much more influence on my profession in neurology and in the medical neurosciences. He's had some impact, but oftentimes he didn't have a venue or an invitation into a circle or a meeting because he didn't have the credentials.
The way he influenced me, he helped me to be a better clinician. He helped me to be a better scientist. He inspired me. If he did anything, he inspired me. On a number of different levels, Jay has facilitated the movement of the field. He has been a champion for the students and has really, really done his best to get people, the young people, to take an interest in EEG and to help fund that process. And that contribution by itself is huge. But then what he's also done is he's taken a number of us under his wing and mentored us over the years.
안녕하세요. 제 이름은 강승환입니다. 제이 건클만의 이렇게 기념 영상을 촬영하는데 인터뷰 초대를 받게 돼서 굉장히 기쁩니다. 저는 의사이고요. MD이고 서울대학교 교수이자 한국인 뇌파 데이터 센터장을 맡고 있고 약 7년 전에 아이메디슨을 창업해서 현재 CEO로 아이메디슨을 경영하고 있습니다. 제이는 제 뇌파 경력에 있어서 가장 영향을 많이 미친 분인데요. 첫 번째로는 회사 설립 이전에 제가 서울대 뇌파 데이터 센터를 시작하면서 아시아에서는 최초로 노모티브 데이터베이스를 개발할 때 제이에게 많은 가르침을 받았습니다. 제이 사랑하고요, 존경하고 당신의 그런 우정, 당신의 조언이 아이싱크 브레인, 우리 아이메디슨의 뇌파 분석 플랫폼 아이싱크 브레인에서 늘 살아서 많은 사람들에게 당신의 뇌파에 대한 사랑과 전문성이 전달될 수 있도록 최선을 다하겠습니다.
Not only does he have, this lovely balance between theory and huge, practical experience, he's also someone that wants to share. There's no hiding. He just opens his heart and shares everything that he knows and that he's excited about.
He's affected a lot of my clients. And many of my clients that come to me, you can think about this as far as a grammatical punctuation analogy. They have periods in their life. They have closure. They're better. A few clients, they haven't gotten better. It's more of an ellipse, right? Kind of dot, dot, dot. And some folks are kind of more like a comma. They got better, but they need something else. And Jay would always be able to nail what it is, the final picture of what they would need. What Jay did for me was simply to fill my life with just like really large, one bold question mark. And it's in perpetuity. It has never, ever stopped. And if you can imagine this question mark from multiple directions unfolding and folding like a ninth dimensional tesseract, that's what's happened. And he would kind of help very quietly guide us. And he always says, and make sure I don't get credit for this, and I don't want to be on any patents, and I don't want to be on any papers. But every step of the way, he has stretched me further. He's spread me rather thin into places I never thought I could go.
Every time we have had a difficult, complex patient that we did a EEG and QEEG, and I managed to get Jay on the same phone call or video conference with the leading experts in the world, they all came away agreeing with Jay and concurring with his finding, which is amazing because in medicine it's very hard to get two specialists to agree on any course of treatment. But after they talked to Jay, every one of those experts has always come away both convinced and impressed.
So Jay Gunkelman calls himself an EEG tech, which he is, as am I, but he's so much more than that. And I think that that's the big joke, is that he's actually a savant.
Jay's influence on my professional life and career has been profound. There's no excuse for laziness. There's no excuse for not looking closely enough and actually knowing what you're talking about. There's no excuse for just accepting somebody else's synthesis. And that includes even what Jay says. I have to see it and know it to know that it's real. He's made me a much more thorough clinician. I think Jay Gunkelman's impact on the EEG community is gigantic and dynamic. The little fissures, the cracks in the facades, he sees them, he talks about them, and he can stand in a fight so politely and so calmly and so civilized that it brings out a lot of the character issues in the field, let alone the scientific issues in the field. He has such integrity that his influence on our field is so valuable. Just that insertion of integrity and constant line of integrity. It's marvelous.
Often he would be talking about something and just take a step to the left and say something that seemed kind of random, and I would just have this moment of laughter and realize that that was just a gift for somebody else, and I didn't know who it was for or what they'd emailed him, but to know that like I wasn't the only one engaged in this process with him of really exploring big ideas and laying them out long form, and having Jay come back and give you like just enough guidance to continue on your path in your process to the next step.
He's like a bottomless pit. I mean, he's just so knowledgeable. He just absorbs and is just absolutely brilliant. And so you just never get tired of listening to him and of learning from him. I just never get tired of it. I think that one of the things that when we put together our QEEG course, one of the things that we felt very strongly about was that people need to understand not just the QEEG and the pretty maps, but they need to understand the EEG, the actual raw EEG. And so he teaches that all the time. When he does his mentoring and teaching and whatever, he is always looking at the EEG and sometimes doesn't even get to the maps, because you learn so much from reading the raw EEG.
Jay is a nest poker. Jay does not mind poking the nest. In fact, I think it gives him great pleasure sometime when he feels like, especially when he feels like people are kind of retreating back or falling into dogma or falling into mistakes, or not doing the very, very best that we could do to understand for our clients, for the science, and just for the pure love of it. If you're not afraid to ask Jay a question, you're going to get an answer that is going to tell you so much more than what you were looking for, and how it fits in with everything else that we know about the brain, that we know about how we record it and how we analyze it, and how we can use all of this knowledge, not just to satisfy ourselves for the passion of knowledge, but to turn around and drive the field. So drive what we do in the field and make it more and more scientifically grounded.
As you know, in this field, there are many differences of opinions. In fact, if you've got 10 people in the room, there will be 10 different opinions. But what I appreciate about Jay Gunkelman is that when he has a difference of opinion with someone, he's very kind about it, but he loves the science, and he'll just ask questions or get to the science. And that impresses me. He doesn't seem to struggle with ego. And for someone with the intelligence that he has and with the fame that he has, that's also just amazing to me. So all of his interactions are kind, and he treats everyone, whether you know about EEG and you're one of the pioneers of the field, or you came in and you ask what some people would say are not smart questions. He treats you with respect.
I call Jay Google Jay whenever I have a question that I can't answer or a client that is particularly difficult. I just call him up and he's always there. Jay is the person that if there's a difficulty with understanding something in relationship to the EEG, I will go to him. But also, he's the person that I'll call up if I want to know something weird about equipment, if I need to make an equipment choice, or if I need to make a choice. One of the things I've asked him is, I need to learn more. How am I going to learn more? Who should I go to?
He brings just so much more professionalism to something and scientific data to what we're doing. I mean, his book, The Art of Artifacting, is just a very spectacular book, but to work with him on a weekly basis in a real world situation with real clients with real problems and seeing the same patterns, I'm so much more skilled at what I do. Everybody who is around him and works with him in the same way has their skills have been heightened. He just is, and he can take something that's so scientific and explain it in a way that makes absolute sense, and his one-liners and his jokes just make it fun.
We are now focusing on evaluations because we feel this is very important, and it's very important for this to kind of get out into the medical community also. And so we are using what we've learned largely from Jay to get the word out and to begin to offer these evaluations to various professional people, and it really it's largely because of Jay and Jay's teachings that we are where we are now, and we are doing what we're doing. And so that's it in a nutshell.
When I think about it, we in this field have an archetypal energy, and that is to help people. And being around Jay, for me anyway, it brings up that archetypal energy. It really brings it to the surface and allows me to express something that I think that with him and his facilitation of that allows me to achieve that goal, which is to help people.
It was a sunny day in late October of 2018 when Cindy Reynolds and I met in Sassoon City, where Jay lives. Right there, just face the wall, Jay. Our express purpose that day was to record Jay's EEG. He had not only agreed to have us acquire his EEG, but to also have his analysis of it filmed for public consumption.
Okay, we're going to import the EEG for analysis. The first one I'm going to import is the eyes open file. I normally look at those first because we get more clinical yield out of them.
Jay imported the EEG files into his computer and began to analyze them with independent component analysis, or ICA. His purpose was to prepare the data for a perspective that would reveal the secrets of his brain.
Now that we've got our perspective straightened out, we're going to end up being able to see the EEG more accurately. The modern technique is to basically select a chunk of the EEG, a few hundred seconds. We've selected a big piece. We're going to run it through an independent component analysis to look for the pieces that make up the EEG. And this is going through the EEG, learning it by going through various iterations to identify maximally independent spatial and temporal patterns. And as it's doing that, this algorithm is a machine learning algorithm. It's going to go between 50 and a few thousand trials before it separates things out. A really easy pattern, 50 will be done. But my brain's not easy, and it's going to take longer, you know. When you got all kinds of stuff wrong, it takes it longer to figure out exactly what it's looking at.
Jay begins to point out the unique and unusual features in his eyes open EEG recording, other than the usual muscle, eye blink, and cardioballistic artifact. He spots an event-related potential, also known as an ERP, and I begin to wonder about the source of that potential in his brain. Okay, well, looking at the polarity shift, can you see where that event-related potential originates?
In fact, you can start to guess what kind of an ERP it might be by looking at where it's being generated.
So Jay's talking about an event-related potential in the brain, which is not artifact, it's real. And you see a shift in polarity from the front to the back of the brain. And so it's not violating Gauss's law. And so I'm asking him, by looking at the montage as we see it right now on the screen, can he identify the origination of the event-related potential?
And when I'm looking at it, it's phase reversing front to back, but I also see a pretty good-sized phase shift in the temporal area.
Yep.
This may have an auditory locus involved, but it's also broken up through the central area here. It's really hard to tell when you look at these unless you have quite a few of them, and then you can average out the EEG and see only the event-related potential.
I think that's when Renita came through the front door.
It could have been. It could have been.
That's right.
I saw your brain brighten up at that moment, Jay.
Well, it should brighten up when she's around.
How many minutes was that in?
She lights my fire, I'll tell you that. So
there were 4 significant features that Cindy and I explored with Jay as he put on his best pattern detectors to identify all salient features of his brain activity. These were, first of all, an event-related potential that seemed to originate from the auditory region of the brain. The second one was a pathological slowing of EEG activity at the T3 electrode location. Following that was a fascinating analysis and discussion of his peak alpha frequency. And finally, he talks about bursts of frontal midline theta activity. There was a significant feature in the left temporal lobe at T3 that showed high amplitude alpha at 11 Hz and a very slow edge of alpha, butting up against the high theta range. Jay referred to this as an abnormal finding.
And you shouldn't have an alpha dominance at T3.
Right.
You know, quite honestly, this is pathology, you know.
That's the ischemia there.
You know, I'm not normal.
Is that that's the ischemia there?
The ischemia, but this isn't the marker for the ischemia. This is the slow edge of alpha. And if you map where the slow edge of alpha is, it's not in the same spot as the dominant alpha. Dominant alpha about 11 Hz. You see some here, some there. The visual areas aren't involved, but the temporal area here, and the left temporal, again, pathology. When I actually look at the slow edge of alpha, you can see the local activity on the left side. Now, it's not as big as the peak, but none of it's really big. I mean, it's eyes open. We don't have a lot of alpha. We can amplify this, but these are all fractional microvoltage.
Jay's peak alpha frequency, which is a common indicator of processing speed and also related to IQ, has changed over the years. His peak alpha frequency in his youth was so fast that in addition to being a qualifying feature for processing speed and IQ, it could also have predicted an anxiety disorder. But Jay finds another amazing feature that has counterbalanced that tendency.
The range of alpha, the alpha disappears here up at about 15 Hertz. 11, maybe 14.65. The upper edge disappears just shy of 15 Hertz. Most of my alpha, we'll see a lot more of it with the eyes closed, but my alpha tends to run really fast. Historically, it started at about 10.
It looked like it was around 11.
Well, it's faster than the average bear, I'll tell you that. But It's slower now than it was. I started at 10, peaked at about 13, and disappeared about 16 historically. And it still mostly starts at 10, but the pathological spots have stuff slower than 10.
You mean age 16, right?
Age 16? No, that was...
You mean 16 hertz?
Background alpha up to about 16 hertz, yeah.
Okay, that explains a lot, Jay.
Well...
What do you make of the frontal midline theta?
The frontal midline theta is a healthy memory function,
Uh-huh.
and I knew I had this. I had frontal midline theta, which is brief bursts of theta. It's not an ongoing persistent theta. It's just brief bursts on memory task. And it's the antithesis of worry and fear. And I have the Alfred E. Newman rhythm. Let me worry, you know, frontal midline theta. And it's not like I don't realize that there's things to worry about, but I don't worry about them.
Finally, Jay launches into a discussion of low-resolution electromagnetic tomography, also known as Loretta analysis, and the manner in which it elucidates the results of his ICA.
You can have a theta frequency like I have at the front of the head, and you can have slow alpha in the theta band in the temporal area, and you can have lambda at the back of the head in the same frequency band. You've got 3 separate generators at the same frequency. What are you going to see in the Loretta? You know, if you make a component analysis, the lambda is different than the temporal slow alpha and then the frontal midline alpha.
Right.
So the component analysis breaks it down into the pieces, and you don't end up with them kind of all, you know, Hungarian goulash together, you know. So it really clarifies things in a major way. And clinically, it just works so damn well. It's almost eerie how well it works. So, you know, years ago, about 18 years ago now, Yuri Kropotov and I met. We lectured together a couple years later in Portugal. And when we were lecturing together, I asked him during one of the breaks, Yuri, are you using ICA to de-artifact the eye movement out of your records? And he said, oh, you know, we tried principal components. It just doesn't work. So he just gave up on component analysis and blind source separation. I said, well, you should read this paper. And I gave him a paper from Schwartz Computational Neuroscience in San Diego, Scott McCaig's paper, and said, you know, you should really look at this. 2 weeks later, I got a disk with his software with ICA implemented on it. He ended up getting the Russian Prize for Science using the ICA to decompose the ERP and EEG into meaningful components. I handed him the statistical tool thinking of it as a way to pull nails out. Here, it's a hammer, pull nails out with it. Well, he turned it around and used it with the other end of the hammer and built the damn Sistine Chapel, you know. I didn't really realize that it was useful for seeing meaningful components. I thought of it as a way to get rid of artifact. And, you know, he saw the real depth of it and used it, and he got the Russian Prize for Science. But
So you're saying that independent components analysis makes the precision of Loretta much higher than other alternative sources of processing EEG.
Exactly.
People are still asking you when you're going to write the book, Jay.
I'm not really a writer, and Yuri's done the book so well. His current book on biomarkers and psychiatry, if you've not read it, it's a fabulous text. And he's, you know, when I hang out with Yuri, I feel stupid. And I always love to hang out with people I feel stupid around. I assume it's a reflection of reality for the moment. And, you know, Dirk makes me feel dumb as a stump. I love to hang out with him. He says I make him feel stupid too. So, you know.
You guys would be a good trade.
You know, we were... you know, the future's really bright. In 1972, when I started my lab, I was an excitable kid. And I'm more excited about the field now than I was then. And at the time, I thought I knew something, you know. Now I know better. The field has tremendous potential that's only now being realized.
The problem with the model of psychiatry in this country is, well, not this country, around the world, is not science-based. You know, if I go to the doctor and he orders a blood test, and that test it shows my cholesterol level is high. Therefore, he places an order for certain statin medication. Then 2 or 3 months later, he wants me to repeat the blood test and show the results. So there's a before and after, and you can see based on science, not based on how he looks at me, but based on how I feel, but he can actually scientifically show before medication, after medication, here are the results. And we've been lacking that in psychiatry.
As healthcare providers, I think we're all trying to do a wonderful job, but increasingly over my career, it felt like we're not always healthcare providers, we're disease managers. We're trying to straighten deck chairs on the Titanic. And often, as we get busier and busier, we rely a lot more on the prescription of medications, sometimes without as much thought as we need to put into it. So we've become healthcare prescribers more than we've become healthcare providers.
The phenotype is a genetically linked characteristic in the EEG, and it does predict medication outcomes, but it's not diagnostically linked. If you think in terms of genetics, we're not talking about racial or cultural stuff, because the EEG has been shown to be equivalent across races and cultures. This is work that goes back to Roy John and John Hughes and Frank Duffy, and they searched all over pygmies, Aleutian Islands, the Aboriginals. If you could find some group that you thought might not be the same, they tested them, and the EEG is the same. So normal is normal is normal. We're all gifted with the same brain. We've got all sorts of features that differentiate us, but in the brain, psychiatric features are as obvious as if you were looking at people that had a big nose or long ears or some physical trait. It's genetically linked as a cluster. And you can look at the EEG and say, oh, look at the big nose on that EEG, or look at the feet on that EEG. So you've got a genetically linked feature that allows you to identify a cluster. So it's actually fairly easy. I quite often suggest I could teach pigeons to peck at these patterns. They're so simplistic.
Jay's idea about EEG and the phenotype is definitely a great one. And I think it's very promising because he was able to demonstrate that there are several distinct types of EEG, and both in healthy population and in psychiatric patients. And the difference between a healthy population and psychiatric patient is just in proportions. But the most important is the idea that each endophenotype needs a special set of neuromodulation techniques, such as neurofeedback, TMS, TDCS. And this is, I think, this is a revolutionary idea.
As a tech, if you've got your eyes open, you can kind of start to see common features in the EEG. So the phenotype paper was not fancy statistical evaluation. It was basically just an old tech having looked at too many EEGs and remembering patterns that I had seen, which were failure modes. Clinical people have something not right. So when you see their EEG, the features that are in it represent their failure, the brain's not working right. These were 11 common patterns I saw way too many times. And you see them again and again and again. You kind of log, well, that's a cluster of findings, and this is a cluster of findings, and all of them actually have real stick the needle in it generator things going on beneath the surface of the skin, down deep in the brain. The original paper didn't even have a sample of raw EEG in it, and Martijn Arns and I had better than 95% concordance between the two raters, Cohen's lambda evaluation between the two of us, untrained raters. The fact that he had that high a rating correlation meant that these are really simple patterns, not like clinical interpretation where you're trying to declare something normal or abnormal. You're just observing that it's present.
Yeah, I still see us sitting with big boxes and big piles of paper, printed out EEGs, trying to do what we called our pile sorting exercise and rating all the individual EEGs into the different EEG phenotypes, and also matching that up and seeing, well, to what degree did we agree? The inter-rater reliability, which actually turned out to be quite high. I still vividly recall those moments of going through all those EEGs and making sense of the chaos and trying to make sense of what it implicated for the patient.
But I simply observed these patterns, and after I had started to accumulate them and wrote down, well, these are common patterns, I just kind of start to list them. I noticed that 2 of them had known genetic correlates, which meant they were endophenotypic. They were phenotypes, EEG endophenotypes. The other 9 of the 11 were candidate phenotypes. We didn't know the genetics. In the last 15 years since the publication, we've actually had the opportunity to identify that the other clusters, the 9 other endophenotypic clusters, also had genetic correlates. We did swab DNA and found a COMT gene corresponded with beta spindling. Johnson & Johnson did a full genome workup on 100 people, costing them $4 million, which is a lot of money, and their researchers thought it was a waste of money because they said, how can the EEG cluster genetics? So they thought that was just a fool's errand to even do the analysis, but it turns out that these were very powerfully clustered.
When we talk about the topic of EEG phenotypes, my answer is usually, duh, to be technical there, in that even Hans Berger, when he understood the EEG, he understood in a sense that there was a phenotype. And there's been analogies to, we know the thumbprint, our fingerprints are unique to every human being, and they can reveal tremendous amounts of information like our human genome. The brain is its own multidimensional brain print that can give that information. And so EEG phenotypes, yes, when you're doing the right analysis, you can see a brain that has tendency towards different dysfunction when the networks are out of whack or they're not regulated well, giving various symptoms. The other thing from the phenotypical standpoint is using EEG to understand Pharmaco EEG. By getting the EEG and properly analyzing it, you can better determine what medications might help somebody. We're doing that now with genetics. People go to their physician, their healthcare provider, and they get a genetic test and say, this is the right drug for you, and this may not be the right medication, which is good, but we don't look at the organ that we're trying to treat.
I'm Candia Smith. I'm a doctor of mental health, which is a strange thing in and of itself, but I'm a licensed psychologist, and I've been working in the field since 1982 and doing neurofeedback since 2007. In typical clinical psychology at this point, people don't pay attention to EEG at all, and it's embarrassing when you then do look and see, oh, this kid that you're treating as if he has ADD actually has a minor seizure disorder and zones out literally from moment to moment. And all the speed in the world is just going to make it worse. By and large, psychology as it's practiced right now doesn't look at this. Even the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, is based on more on what drugs can do for people than what's actually going on with people.
In both in psychiatry and mental disorders, we need to look at the EEG and see what the brain is doing. In its simplest form, if someone has anxiety, for example, the EEG can simply reflect that the speed of the underlying EEG is too fast. If someone is depressed, we can see what type of medication they are more likely to respond, because not all depressions look the same to EEG. Some patients who are depressed have what's called anxious depression, which means their EEG is already going faster. So if I'm selecting medication for that patient, giving him SSRI will make that patient worse, because most SSRIs are designed to make the speed of the EEG go one cycle faster. So I'm making a patient who's already too fast, make him worse. So we can use EEG for medication management. We can also use to detect to see what is it missed that might be going on that we haven't looked at, and we can look to see how we can treat the patient with other non-medication approaches.
Different phenotypes require different medications, and 20% approximately of the ADD, ADHD population have unexpected epileptiform content. And if you see epileptiform content with or without a seizure, you need to stabilize that. Neurologists have been taught basically that unless they're having convulsions, you don't treat them. Benign Rolandic epilepsy, not too many have convulsions, but they have epileptiform discharges. And if you show an abnormal EEG, a dramatically abnormal EEG to a neurologist, unless they're having a seizure, you're not going to get them to actually medicate. However, what happens clinically if you do treat? Well, Ron Swatsina, based on the recommendations that we had in their population of psychiatric patients that had been medication failures previously, we see epileptiform content, we suggest that they consider an empirical trial of an anticonvulsant. And at that point, if you actually treat, you have an 85% positive clinical outcome. So the phenotypes basically have been used to predict medication.
I had a patient, and this was one of the most profound cases. The patient had been treated for 13 years, had gone through every class of antidepressant medication without success. The final frustration was when they said, we can't do anything else for you, why don't you go see the Brain Wellness Center people? After we did an EEG, the patient was having frontal and temporal lobe epilepsy, which explained they were not schizophrenic, they were not bipolar, they were not hallucinating, they were actually having seizures, which was very quickly treated with a simple anti-seizure medication. Within 2 weeks, the patient was able to function normally, where 13 years of various medication trials through psychiatry had failed to give him satisfactory result. Now, it's just easy for us to talk about 13 years, but imagine that patient and how much their families suffered through those 13 years of medication changes without results. You basically rob the patient of 13 years of their life. If we had done our job at the very beginning and somebody had ordered an EEG recording, that patient and their family would have not suffered all those years. And there's no harm, there is no significant expense. EEG recording is a very simple procedure that can be accomplished in a doctor's office in 20 minutes. So what is the compelling reason not to utilize it?
DSM is not a Bible, it's a dictionary. It's a way to categorize, but it doesn't tell you how to treat. So it's highly reliable, but it's not valid. And, it's nice to have a valid prediction. So the phenotype model basically predicts how to treat. It cuts across the DSM. Whether you're depressed or whether you have ADD, if you have a theta pattern at the frontocentral midline, you respond to the same drug. It doesn't matter what your diagnosis was. Well, if you see these patterns in some other diagnosis, these are the same interventions. This does not change with the diagnosis because the diagnosis isn't valid. It's only good for billing. So if you really want to know how to treat somebody, look at their EEG, not their story. I'm a tech, I read EEGs, I don't read histories. So I would suggest that the EEG is such a powerful predictor of therapeutic outcome that it's essentially undervalued, and that's unfortunate.
If we seek to better understand the model of EEG phenotypes. I look at an EEG and it's giving me brain information, then that will help further unify the field of healthcare. It would get, I think, psychiatrists and neurologists to go back working collaboratively and together as they did many, many years ago. We're looking at the same organ and we're in two different worlds, and it doesn't need to be that way. I don't want to play psychiatrist, and most psychiatrists don't want to play neurologist, but we need to put our pieces of the pie back together, and quantitative EEG and EEG phenotyping is an incredibly useful and easy way to do that. And it doesn't take a whole lot of training to understand.
I think that the EEG interpretation and the use of EEG for clinical decision making is just going to continue to expand and be recognized as a very, it's an amazing tool. It's something that anybody pretty much can have in their office from which to make diagnostic and or treatment decisions that is so much more powerful and exact than the way we do it now. People now with depression, they might go through 3 or 4 different antidepressants before the doctor happens on one that works for them. As Jay has shown, there are exacting EEG types that respond to certain medications. You don't need to guess. Look at the EEG. You could tell what medication is going to do for them. The diagnosis doesn't have that much to do with it, but the way the brain works does. That work is true and valid and will continue to be recognized and enlarged is a huge change to the field.
My hope and prospect for phenotyping model is that anytime a patient walks into a psychiatrist's office and has a problem, the psychiatrist says, wait, let me get an EEG done, let me see the phenotype before I write a prescription. That is the science, not based on how you describe different things, but based on what your brain is doing, I can give you the medication that will treat it. That's the best hope I can have for the phenotype model in the future.
I think what finally led to me looking into this further was just either burnout or frustration, seeing so many children who have uncontrolled seizures, and we kind of keep doing the same thing over and over. We keep choosing a different medication, change, or when that doesn't work, we cut out part of the brain, if we can find it, to try to help control the seizures. The problem with that is that epilepsy, seizures are a network problem, how the brain is all connected together. So I've said frequently, you can't cut out a slice of the San Andreas Fault and think you're going to fix earthquakes.
You know, when I think about something that really stands out with Jay, an accomplishment, recently he worked with a young girl with epilepsy, seizure disorder. And Jay caught this disorder looking at the EEG, was able to come up with a treatment plan and execute a treatment plan with this child that resolved the issue.
I have seen several patients cured of their epilepsy as a result of using neurofeedback, and they've been off medication and seizure-free because their brains were retrained, which is how our brains are created to work anyway.
I worked with a girl, in fact, Jay brought her into my life. Brian Milstead and Jay brought her into my life. Her name was Maggie, and Maggie had epilepsy. And because of Jay's work, Maggie's not having epilepsy anymore, which is incredible. I would not have been able to have worked with a kiddo like Maggie, training her how to do the therapy, had Jay not guided that and been able to sort out where in Maggie's brain the dysfunction and dysregulation is occurring so that we could aim the therapy in the right direction to help her make the change. So professionally, there are people that, Jay's guidance is critical.
My name is Maggie, and I am 8 years old.
At about a year old, she started having grand mal seizures. We were told it was epilepsy. She would have, on average, 2 grand mal seizures a week. 90% of her sleep time, she was in a seizure.
I would wake up a lot during the night. I didn't know when it was coming or not.
Some would last 20 seconds, some would last 5 minutes.
It's not if it'll happen, it was, well, when is it going to happen?
She had one time it was 5 minutes long.
I had her right in my arms and she started turning blue. That was really, really the hard one.
One day, our good friend Brian, I must have had a very defeated look on my face or something in line.
So I asked her, I said, hey Kim, what's going on? You just look sad, like something happened.
Maggie had a bad seizure.
Seizing, do you know what I do for a living? And she said, no. I said, well, I happen to work in the field of neuroscience, and if you get a copy of the EEG, I'd be happy to share it with one of my great friends, and if there's anything that we can do, we'll try to help.
Just listening to him, he sounded absolutely insane. Really, you're gonna help my daughter, you're gonna hook her up to these wires and she's gonna be cured, okay.
The subjective experience sometimes is simply unconsciousness. Like there was just a snip of time missing, and you ask them, what happened?
I didn't really remember it. Like, kind of, but not really.
The kind of epilepsy she has, which is a very unique kind. If you fall asleep, your brain has a seizure, your body is still. You don't look like you're convulsing, but your brain is having a seizure. And it can kill you in your sleep.
What am I going to do for this young person that they haven't already gotten? Neurofeedback is a way of doing some operant training to the brain.
And the meta-analysis that was done by Gabriel Tan showed an 84% chance of a 50% or greater reduction in seizures following neurofeedback. And the doctor said, I'm a specialist in this area. I've never heard of this. How can it be real if I've never heard of it? He was an open-minded skeptic, which is all we needed.
Well, if it doesn't hurt, let's just give it a shot. So we started this treatment.
They provided the entire session's treatment out of the goodness of their hearts.
Eventually what we started doing was shaping and conditioning the brain.
We went up to Linda, driving through the snowstorm. Met up with her. We got Maggie's brain mapped.
I did brain training. I stopped having seizures.
It's a behavioral training. It gives the body and the brain a message by the feedback. Do this, don't do that. You're just gonna do all the cool talents that you do to make that ball levitate. No hands, you can't use any hands though.
It was fun, really fun.
So the family went up, spent a weekend with Linda. Linda showed them how to connect the electrodes and which locations they had to go on.
Who helped her? Maggie helped her. She did the work. Nobody did it but Maggie. We're really just optimizing her brain function. We're not treating epilepsy. The doctor's treating the epilepsy. We're just helping her learn how to operate her brain.
Every week, Linda would pop in and make a few adjustments on the training protocol. Well, 3 to 4 weeks into training, Mom calls me, just completely excited, practically crying. Turns out that Maggie slept through the night. It was the first time she had slept through the night in over 2 years.
I raced to her room and I walk in there and she was peacefully sleeping great. From that moment, we just knew this was our journey. So once her treatment plan was over, approximately 70 sessions, she had a completely clean EEG. She goes on the monkey bars and hangs upside down, goes on bike rides, goes swimming. She's living a normal childhood now. it's exciting.
Neurofeedback has saved her life. It truly has.
You meet somebody in line and ask them how they're doing, and their life changes. The future is brilliantly bright because the entire world is doing this research now. Not just some people in the US and slow cortical potentials in Europe, but this is spread internationally.
In 2003, 2006, my group recorded the HBI database, collected the data for HBI database. HBI stands for Human Brain Index. And we recorded 1,000 healthy subjects and later on more than 1,000 patients. And it took us 2 years to record 1,000 healthy subjects and more years to record more than 1,000 patients with ADHD, schizophrenia, OCD, autism. And thus we created the HBI database, and this database stands for Human Brain Index, as I already said. And this database is now used in different centers around the world. And I think that it's indeed will change the way of diagnosis and prognosis, the most important prognosis of brain dysfunctions.
One of the big differentiators when we are moving from the world of EEG into the world of QEEG is that we can take this data that we've collected, run it through the fast Fourier transform, the FFT, and then compare that to a normative database. The word normative is very important because I don't know what normal is. I have no authority to tell you what normal is. But a group of people get together and they have an inclusion-exclusion criteria. And based on that, we take this person's EEG and we compare it against numerous parameters to this normative sample. And we look generally at to what extent the person is 1, 2, 3 standard deviations above the norm or 1, 2, 3 standard deviations below the norm. And this is really helpful to see like what a shift towards health could look like for this person. And it's also very helpful to explain it to people.
And in South Korea, they've collected a normative database, including males and females tested separately. And, males and females are out of phase during the developmental trajectory. You get two lines that are out of phase, and you combine them. What do you get? Something you don't want to be compared to. You're either a male or a female, depending upon which point in time. And you don't want to average the two together and look at the normed average, because what do you get? A eunuch? This is crazy. Everybody should have known better for decades. They said, well, they're pretty much the same, so we combined them, when really the answer is that it would have been twice as hard to collect the database. It's twice as many people. You can't collect half a database and call it a database. You have to have enough people to describe the age groups. So it's twice as much work. And the Koreans went to the trouble of actually doing that twice as much work.
당시에는 지금까지 저희 데이터베이스가 나오기 전까지는 남녀를 구분하지 않는 그런 연령대로 구분되는 데이터베이스를 사용했던 게 일반적인데요. 처음에 제가 데이터베이스 프로젝트를 시작할 때 저희는 남녀를 구분하는 것이 굉장히 중요하다라고 하는 것을 강조를 했었고 처음부터 그거를 염두에 두고 프로젝트를 시작하게 되었습니다.
I was the one who introduced them to the idea how to collect the database, and they used our methodology of collecting the database. I was there in Seoul. We started their office in Seoul that is supposed to collect the data.
They went from DC to 150 hertz, not 1 hertz to 28, which is the old databases. Some of the databases that are more current went up to 45, but gamma exists, gamma 2 at 80 to 100 hertz, and that's critical for consciousness researchers. They want to look at gamma 2. And ripples up at 120 to 150 hertz. Those are important for consciousness. And the databases didn't have any of that.
When we compared, we found actually quite a big difference, not in event-related potentials, but in EEG spectra. And for example, the Korean people, for some reason, they have quite a high amplitude of frontal midline theta. Europeans, they usually, especially in eyes open or eyes closed condition, they have quite small amplitude of this theta activity. And frontal midline theta is the rhythmicity that is generated, supposedly generated by the hippocampal circuit, and it increases with the task load. For example, it's quite high in the when the subject is performing a mathematical task. It's increasing during the working memory task, and it's also associated with a release from anxiety.
And Jay recently really got into the newest machine learning algorithms that has really defined the next level of what EEG is going to be doing, which is machine learning. And it's happening right now. It's where you can use machine learning to identify specific things in the record that you couldn't see with the naked eye. But this computer algorithm can. And Jay has taken that type of technology and helped us to bridge the gap between the researchers and the clinicians, which is what I'm currently doing now as well.
So the South Koreans, you know, their normative database, which has only now gotten a $3 million investment from an angel in the US to go through the FDA registration for their database. But they've got a cloud server that'll get you a QEEG processed in 15 minutes. And it's processed with really high level analysis with computational neuroscience approaches as opposed to the old simple spectral approach. You break the brain activity down into the component parts that make it up and show the sources of the components. And you've got a normative database of where those should be. So you can actually see frequency displacement and spatial displacement within the norms, as well as the specific components.
특히 이 뇌파에서 노이즈를 제거하는 부분에 있어서는 ICA 기법이라고 하는 것이 있는데요. 물론 일부에서는 이제 ICA 기법을 쓰는 것에 대해서 반대하는 견해도 있지만 여러 가지 최신 뉴로사이언스의 그런 이론을 바탕으로 했을 때 ICA를 기반으로 한 노이즈 제거와 신호 재구성은 첨단 기법이고 또 제이가 또 이런 부분에서 굉장히 또 필요로 하고 항상 그 부분을 강조를 했기 때문에 저희도 ICA를 기반으로 한 노이즈 제거 파이프라인을 도입을 했습니다. 한 가지 다른 거는 제이는 노이즈 컴포넌트를 다 눈으로 보고 빼는데 반면에 저희는 매번 제이한테 물어볼 수 없기 때문에 AI 기법을 이용을 해서 노이즈 컴포넌트를 다 트레이닝 시켜가지고 저희 시스템에서는 자동으로 노이즈 컴포넌트 디텍션을 해갖고 빼는 식의 자동화를 이루었습니다.
So, is the future bright? It's so bright I gotta cover one eye now, you know. It's unbelievably bright. It's a hugely bright future for the field.
Whenever you ask Jay how he's doing, he kind of laughs off the question. Because he's not in the best physical health. He is someone who's had more than 9 lives. He's lost fingers, he's lost his pituitary, he's lost teeth, he recently essentially lost his eye, and he keeps on ticking like the Energizer Bunny. You never hear him complain. And it's a very sweet quality. It's a very sweet quality. We love him.
Do you see him retiring?
No, Jay won't ever retire. I mean, Jay will talk about retiring, but he'll always have his hands in some project of some sort. He's far too smart to retire.
It's been really good, 27 years, you know. There's no guarantees on surgeries, you know, they don't come with a warranty. And finally, real recently, within the last few weeks, I popped the seal. So I'm leaking cerebrospinal fluid out my nose now. But, you know, I'm done with procedures, so there's no, I've got what I've got. I'll live with what I have, and that's the way it is.
I've known Jay for about 25 years, and every time you talk to Jay, he's dying. You know, every time you think, how are you doing? Oh, I'm dying. I got this thing leaking, that thing leaking. You got the patch on the eye. But this has been going on for 25 years, and I remember telling him, your partners are going to die first before you do. And of course, sadly, his old partner died a couple of years back, and I realized I'm now his partner, and that I might be next.
It's very hard to stay alive when you don't have a pituitary. And before the pituitary brain surgery, for the tumor that destroyed the pituitary, I was told I was already one more thing wrong with you, you'll be a monster. But when the pituitary was gone, I got a half a chance of living 10 years was what they quoted, the mortality and morbidity statistics. And there are a lot of times that I come very, very close.
It's like taking a building block away from an important construction. So Jay is essential and fundamental for neurofeedback, neuromodulatio, and EEG in general.
With no pituitary, you don't make vasopressin. With no vasopressin, you don't control body fluids. So I have a nasal spray that regulates my kidney function. And if I use enough of it to have normal kidney function, then it demineralizes my bones, and the steroids are demineralizing my bones anyway. So I'm trying to keep my bones intact. So there's a subtle balance. But as I'm drinking water, I'm flushing out salt. And if you drink too much water without enough salt replacement, you go hypokalemic and your heart stops.
I do feel that the field is better prepared for his departure than most fields get to be. Due to Jay's health conditions and the fact that he's really been in a place where any day could be the day for quite a number of years now, this notion of how are we preparing for this change has been, something I've been considering for years now.
Jay's name, family name, I mean, comes from a German word, Gunkel, which is spindle. And the spindle is supposed to keep rotating, keep going. So I don't think that Jay will ever leave this field. He may stop doing his reports on quantitative EEG, but you cannot stop Jay of thinking, you cannot stop Jay of reading, of writing. I don't believe that Jay is going to leave this field. No.
Just kind of eke myself back from the edge a few times. So, I've made it so far, but I'm fine with it either way, which is why I have a PULST-EMT DNR, which is a physician order for life-sustaining technology, emergency medical tech, do not resuscitate order. So when they see the medical alert, they go to your wallet and you have a bright pink reddish paper that says, don't touch them, doctor's orders. I've got some really good friends, Brian Milstead is a dear friend of mine, and he doesn't give a shit that I got a POST-EMT DNR. He says if I go down, he's going to resuscitate me, and if I turn out to be vegetable, he'll kill me. So that's a friend, Anyway. The question was regarding my near-death experiences. The easiest word you could say is eerie, freaky, awe-inspiring, and all in its own weird way. But after a while, you know, it's kind of intriguing, almost not quite like a carnival ride, but sort of. Imagine that you're looking forward and you start to lose your peripheral vision. You get a hood over here. You get a hooded figure in your peripheral vision. And you go to the center and it's white, and then that expands. But the whiteness isn't just white, it's also warm. And it's kind of like the warm fuzzies, and it's all enveloping. There's emotion to it too. It's not just vision and tactile. It's joy and ecstasy and everything all rolled into one great big white ball. Like I say, I don't really mind going there anymore. It's not disturbing. I don't care one way or the other. If I stay or don't, I mean, it's fine with me either way.
There's so many of us in this field who call Jay our mentor, and we've all kind of gotten to this place where we're going, oh my gosh, who's going to replace him? And we realize no one's going to replace him. But the nugget I have, the nugget my colleagues have, we've all got to bring this together and try to make this make up the whole.
It leaves a big gap for a lot of people around the world who have been working with him. And I hope there's myself and many that can fill those shoes, although it's impossible for me to think about filling anybody's shoes, let alone Jay's.
People ask me, well, who are you going to replace him with? And I said, no one. There is no one on this planet that is equally qualified or this knowledgeable. So how can you replace that? You know, I don't know what living with Einstein would have been like, but having had exposure to Jay, I can truly say that I have had the opportunity of knowing a genius.
As you know, show must go on. And this is not a show. This is the solid science, and the solid science must go on. You know, I think that the whole idea of making this documentary is the idea of what? Just tell about this great scientist and tell about his passion, and to inspire young people to go into this field, because we need new talents, we need new ideas, new people, and that is what Jay is always did. I mean, Jay always attracted people, young people to this field. And young people are what? New ideas, new technologies. Yeah, and this is very important.